In the Nevada desert, a disgraced journalist was about to purchase a death sentence for less than the price of a meal. What started as a desperate escape from guilt took a shocking turn when she found a sealed lockbox hidden beneath the floorboards. Evelyn Margaret Rourke wasn't your typical drifter. For 5 years, she had spent her life exposing corruption in San Francisco's political machine. Known for her relentless pursuit of truth that got people killed, when she pried open that rusted trapdoor and discovered a locket, coded maps, and the initials RM carved into the wood, she had no idea she was unearthing a conspiracy buried for a century and a half. Evelyn followed clues that would lead to murder, betrayal, and the names of 23 men silenced to protect powerful families. What began as a 70-cent purchase seeking peace would become a reckoning. The town of redemption would never be the same after Rose Mercer's voice, silenced in 1847 for refusing to hide the truth, finally echoed across the desert through a woman who'd promised herself never to investigate again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 70 cents bought me a death sentence. Though I didn't know it at the time, the county auctioneer's voice cracked like old leather as he gestured toward the collapsed structure at the edge of the Nevada desert. Do I hear 75? Anyone? 75 cents for this fine piece of history? Fine piece of history. The man was a poet. What stood before us was barely standing at all. A skeletal frame of sun-bleached wood and broken windows, surrounded by nothing but sand, sagebrush, and the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The old Stagecoach station looked like it had given up on life decades ago and was just waiting for permission to collapse entirely. Nobody bid against me. The locals watched with expressions somewhere between amusement and pity as I raised my hand. A woman from San Francisco buying cursed ground for less than the price of a decent meal. They probably thought I was running from something. They were right. Sold to the lady in the grey coat, the auctioneer announced, relief evident in his voice. One less property rotting on the county books. He didn't mention the whispers I'd already heard in town, about travelers who disappeared on this stretch of road, about strange lights in the desert, about how every previous owner had either died or fled within a year. I signed the deed with hands steadier than they'd been in months. Evelyn Margaret Rourke, owner of nothing but guilt and 70 cents worth of Nevada dust. My editor back in San Francisco would have called it poetic. But my editor was the reason I'd left everything behind and come here looking for silence. The crowd dispersed quickly, eager to be away from the place before sundown. Superstitious fools, I thought. But as I stood alone before my new property, watching shadows lengthen across the desert floor, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. Like the station and I understood each other somehow. We were both abandoned, both trying to forget what we'd been. You actually bought it. I turned to find an old man watching me from beside a weathered wagon. He wore clothes that had seen better decades and a hat that cast his face in shadow. But his eyes were sharp, too sharp. The kind of eyes that missed nothing. I did, I said, matching his matter-of-fact tone. Is that a problem? Depends on whether you scare easy. He stepped closer, studying me with uncomfortable intensity. Name's Hiram Pike. I look after properties in these parts. Keep squatters out. Make sure roofs don't cave in on themselves. I figured you might need help settling in. I'm perfectly capable of settling myself. Didn't say you weren't. He glanced at the station, his expression unreadable. But that place has been empty a long time. Things settle in empty places. Sometimes things that don't take kindly to being disturbed. I'd spent 5 years as a journalist, exposing corruption in San Francisco's political machine. I'd faced down men who'd killed for far less than the secrets I'd printed. I wasn't about to be intimidated by an old man's ghost stories. I'll take my chances, Mr. Pike. Thank you for the concern. He studied me a moment longer, then nodded slowly. You've got sand, I'll give you that. Most folks won't even set foot on this property after dark. But you'll learn. He turned back toward his wagon, then paused. "One piece of advice, Miss Rourke. When you're exploring that old place, and I know you will, pay attention to what you find. History doesn't die out here. It just waits." I watched him drive away, dust rising in his wake. The sun touched the horizon, bleeding red across the desert sky. Time to inspect my 70-cent investment. The station was worse up close. Floorboards sagged beneath my boots, and every step sent up clouds of dust that made me cough. But there was something almost noble about the structure's stubborn refusal to surrender completely. Hand-hewn beams still held the roof. Window frames remained square despite years of wind and heat. Someone had built this place to last. I found remnants of previous lives everywhere. Initials carved into door frames. RM plus SF, J. Monsieur 1847 HC was here. Wanted posters so faded I could barely make out the faces. Empty bottles lined up on a windowsill like soldiers awaiting orders that would never come. A broken chair in the corner, positioned to face the door, as if someone had spent years watching for riders who never arrived. My reporter's instincts stirred, despite my best efforts to suppress them. Who had lived here? What stories had these walls witnessed? I'd come to the desert to escape stories, to stop asking questions that got people killed. But curiosity was like hunger. You could ignore it for a while, but eventually it demanded to be fed. I was sweeping debris from what had once been the main room when my broom caught on something. A board moved beneath my feet, shifting with a hollow sound that didn't match the solid floor around it. I knelt down, running my fingers along the edges until I found the gap, a trapdoor, hidden beneath years of accumulated dirt and dust. Every instinct I'd developed as an investigative journalist screamed at me to leave it alone. Trapdoors meant secrets. Secrets meant danger. I'd learned that lesson in blood back in San Francisco. When my expose on corrupt judges had gotten my source, my friend, murdered in an alley 3 blocks from the courthouse. But my hands were already working at the edges, prying at the wood until I found the rusted ring handle. The door resisted, then gave with a groan that sounded almost like a warning. Below lay darkness, and the smell of earth undisturbed for generations. I retrieved my lantern and lowered it into the opening. The light revealed a shallow space, not a cellar, but a deliberate hiding spot, just large enough for a person to crouch or for something valuable to be concealed. The walls were lined with stones, carefully placed. Someone had taken time with this. Someone had wanted whatever they hid here to stay hidden. That's when I heard it. A faint metallic rattle, like chains shifting in the dark. I froze, lantern held steady, though my hands wanted to shake. There was nothing down there, just earth and stones and shadows. But the sound came again, softer this time, almost rhythmic, almost like wind. Just wind moving through gaps in the foundation, making metal creak somewhere in the structure. I forced myself to breathe normally. This was exactly the kind of superstitious thinking I'd always mocked in others. There were no ghosts here, no curses, just old wood and older secrets. But I didn't go down into that space. Not that night. I closed the trapdoor and covered it with my bedroll. Then I sat against the wall facing the entrance, watching moonlight creep across the floor through broken windows. Hiram Pike's words echoed in my mind. History doesn't die out here. It just waits. I'd come to Nevada looking for peace, for a place where the past couldn't find me. Instead, I'd bought 70 cents worth of someone else's buried truth. And despite every promise I'd made to myself about leaving journalism behind, despite the guilt that woke me screaming most nights, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt curious. That should have been my first warning. Morning light revealed exactly how foolish my purchase had been. The station looked even worse in daylight. Roof sagging in the middle, walls leaning like drunk men, the whole structure one strong wind away from total collapse. But I'd slept better than I had in San Francisco, and that was worth 70 cents alone. I spent the morning making the place minimally habitable. Found a pump outside that still worked, though the water came up rust red for the first few minutes. Cleared enough space for my few belongings. Tried not to think about the trapdoor hidden beneath my bedroll. Failed entirely. By noon, I'd convinced myself I was being ridiculous. Whatever was down there had been buried for years, probably decades. It was likely nothing, old bottles, broken equipment, worthless artifacts of a forgotten time. The sensible thing would be to ignore it, focus on making the station livable, maybe even write about the experience. A personal essay about finding peace in desolation. My editor would hate it, which meant it was probably good. I was on my knees prying at the trapdoor before I consciously decided to investigate. The space below was larger than I'd thought. In daylight, with my lantern illuminating every corner, I could see that someone had gone to considerable effort. The stones lining the walls were placed with care, creating a waterproof chamber. The floor was bare earth, packed hard by time. And in the far corner, barely visible beneath a coating of dust, sat a metal lockbox. My heart hammered as I lowered myself into the space. The box was small, maybe a foot square, made of iron that had oxidized to a deep orange brown. Strange engravings covered the surface, symbols I didn't recognize, spirals and crosses, and what might have been letters in an alphabet I'd never seen. And on the lid, scratched with something sharp, OSM and JM, the same initials I'd seen carved in the doorframe upstairs. The lock was rusted shut. I had to carry the entire box up into the light and work at it with a knife for 20 minutes before the mechanism finally gave. The lid resisted, then opened with a sound like a sigh. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow survived the years, were 3 items: a folded map, yellowed and brittle, showing what looked like the surrounding territory, but with notations I couldn't read. Someone had marked locations with small X's, connected by dotted lines that might have been trails or boundaries or something else entirely. A coded note, written in cramped handwriting on paper so old it felt like fabric. The words made no sense. Jumbles of letters and numbers, patterns that suggested meaning without revealing it. But at the bottom, in clearer script, for those with courage to remember what was lost, and a gold locket on a delicate chain. I opened the locket with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph, faded to sepia tones. A woman's face, young and solemn, staring directly at the camera with eyes that seemed to challenge whoever looked at her. Beautiful in a severe way, with dark hair pulled back and the expression that suggested she knew secrets worth keeping. On the opposite side of the locket, an inscription, Shrisim. Even in silence, your voice remains. Shrisim. The initials on the box on the doorframe. Someone had loved this woman enough to hide her memory in a sealed chamber beneath a forgotten station. Someone had cared enough to leave clues, to create a puzzle that might one day be solved. I should have reburied it all. Should have put the lockbox back where I found it and pretended I'd never opened that trap door. My last investigation had ended with blood in the streets, and my friend Thomas lying dead because I couldn't let a story die. I'd promised myself never again. No more questions, no more digging. But my fingers were already tracing the map, following those mysterious dotted lines. The ride into town took an hour through heat that turned the air to liquid shimmer. I'd tucked the map and locket into my saddlebag, leaving the coded note at the station. Some instinct told me not to carry everything at once. The town of redemption, and yes, I appreciated the irony, was the kind of place that looked like it had given up pretending to be prosperous. One main street, a handful of businesses, buildings that sagged with resignation. The people I passed watched me with the careful neutrality of those who'd learned not to expect good things from strangers. The general store smelled like tobacco and old wood. Behind the counter, a woman with grey hair and suspicious eyes tracked my entrance. "Help you?" "I hope so. I just bought the old Stagecoach station east of here, the one at the county auction." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. "That's so. You fixing to stay?" "That's the plan." I set the locket on the counter between us. "I found this in the property. Thought maybe someone local might recognize the woman in the photograph. The initials are RM. The woman didn't touch the locket. Didn't even look at it directly. Don't know her. Station's been abandoned 40 years or more. Whoever lived there is long dead. What about the initials? JM and RM. They're carved all over the—" I said I don't know. Her voice was flat, final. "You want supplies or not?" I bought coffee and lamp oil, sensing I wouldn't get answers here. But as I was leaving, the woman spoke again. "You seem like a sensible person, miss. Take some advice. That station, that land, it's got a past nobody wants to remember. Things were buried out there that should stay buried. You keep digging around in history, you might not like what crawls out." Outside, the afternoon sun was brutal. I stood on the wooden sidewalk, trying to decide my next move, when a voice spoke from behind me. "Evelyn Rourke." I turned to find a man in a marshal's uniform, tall and clean-shaven, with the kind of polished appearance that looked out of place in Redemption's dusty streets. His badge caught the light like a warning. "Marshal Crane," he introduced himself, extending a hand I didn't take. His smile remained pleasant. "Word travels fast in small towns. Heard we had a new resident. News spreads even faster when people want you to know they're watching." His smile widened slightly. "Sharp, I like that. But you misunderstand. I'm here as a courtesy, to welcome you and to offer some friendly advice." Everyone seems eager to advise me. "Today, because this is a good town full of good. People who don't want to see anyone get hurt." And he glanced at the saddlebag where I'd hidden the map. "That station you bought has a reputation. Previous owners have had accidents, gotten lost in the desert. One fellow went mad, started talking about voices in the walls, had to be removed for his own safety. And you're telling me this because you care about my safety. I'm telling you this because I'm sworn to protect this community." His eyes were flat, friendly tone notwithstanding. "Sometimes protection means preventing trouble before it starts. You seem like an intelligent woman, Miss Rourke. Intelligent enough to know when to leave well enough alone." I thought about Thomas, bleeding out on cobblestones while I held his hand and promised vengeance. Thought about the judges I'd exposed, the corruption I'd unveiled, the price we'd both paid for the truth. Marshal Crane looked like every corrupt lawman I'd ever interviewed. Polished exterior, rotted core. "Thank you for the concern, Marshal. I'll keep it in mind. You do that." He tipped his hat, still smiling. "And Miss Rourke, if you find anything unusual out at that station, old belongings, documents, anything that seems out of place, I'd appreciate it if you'd bring them to me. For historical purposes, you understand." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing alone in the brutal sunlight with a map I suddenly wanted very much to follow. That evening, Hiram Pike returned. I heard his wagon before I saw it, the sound of wheels and hoofbeats carrying across the flat desert. He pulled up outside the station as the sun was setting, climbing down with surprising agility for a man his age. "Thought you might need help with repairs," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "And wanted to make sure you survived your first night." "I'm fine, Mr. Pike, though the marshal seems concerned about my welfare. And the woman at the general store. Everyone's very interested in my safety. That's because nobody's been foolish enough to actually stay here in decades." He glanced at the station, then at me. "You went to town asking questions, didn't you?" "I found something. A lockbox under the floor." I watched his reaction carefully. Inside was a locket with initials, RM. "Do you know who that might be?" Hiram was quiet for a long moment, face half-shadowed in the fading light. When he spoke, his voice was heavy. "My grandfather drove stagecoach on this route. He told stories, toward the end of his life. Stories about riders who made pacts they shouldn't have made. About secrets buried so deep they were supposed to stay lost forever. What kind of secrets? The kind that powerful men killed to protect." He met my eyes finally. "Miss Rourke, I'll help you make this place livable if you want. But as a friend, and I hope we're becoming friends, I'm begging you, whatever you found, bury it again. Some stories were meant to end." I thought about that for a long time after he left. Stood on the sagging porch watching stars emerge in the vast desert sky, feeling the weight of the locket in my pocket. Thomas had said something similar once near the end. "Maybe we should let this one go, Evelyn. Maybe some corruption is too deep to root out." I'd refused to listen. And he died for my stubbornness, but standing there in the darkness, feeling the desert wind that never quite stopped blowing, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lockbox had been left for someone to find. That whoever RM was, She deserved more than eternal silence. I went inside and spread the map across the floor by lamplight. One location was marked clearly, with a small drawing of a tree beside the X. I traced the route from the station with my finger, estimating distance and direction. Half a day's ride, maybe. To a place the map labeled in faded ink, the Rider's Oak. I'd made my decision before I consciously realized it. Some debts couldn't be paid with silence. Hiram agreed to guide me, though his reluctance was obvious. We set out at dawn, riding across desert that looked empty but wasn't, full of hidden life, secret waters, dangers that revealed themselves only when you'd already made the wrong step. You could still turn back, Hiram said for the third time. I'd think better of you for it, not worse. And if I did, would you be able to sleep at night, knowing what might be out here, never learning the truth? He was quiet for a long time. No, he admitted finally. I suppose I wouldn't. The map was surprisingly accurate despite its age. We followed landmarks that had survived decades, a distinctive rock formation, a dry wash that became a raging river in the rare rains, a ridgeline that ran like a scar across the horizon. Whoever had drawn the map knew this country intimately. It was past noon when we found it. The oak stood alone on a slight rise, massive and ancient, split down the middle by lightning at some point in its long life. But both halves still lived, leaves green despite the desert heat, roots going deep enough to find water that sustained it through generations of drought. The Rider's Oak, Hiram said softly. My grandfather mentioned it, said this was where decisions got made, where the pact was sealed. We dismounted and approached carefully. The ground around the tree was different, disturbed in ways that suggested human interference, even after decades. I found the first evidence within minutes, rusted bullets half buried in the dirt, corroded by time, but still recognizable. There was a fight here, I said, holding up one of the bullets. Or an execution. Hiram knelt by the tree's base, brushing away dirt. Look at this, carved into the wood, barely visible beneath years of growth. Here the riders made their stand. Here the truth was buried. God forgive us all. My hands started shaking. This wasn't just history. This was testimony, carved by someone who'd survived something terrible and wanted the world to remember. Or maybe to forget. We dug carefully, using tools Hiram had brought. The earth gave up its secrets slowly. First more bullets, then buckles and buttons from clothing long since rotted away. Then wrapped in oilcloth similar to what had protected the locket, a journal. The leather cover was cracked but intact. Inside, pages covered in neat handwriting, dates from the 1840s marching down the margins. And on the first page, a name, Jonas Mercer J.M., the initials from the lockbox. My heart was hammering as I began to read aloud. Hiram, leaning close to listen. July 14th, 1847. We have done something today that will haunt us to our graves. The gold shipment never made it to the fort. The riders knew it was coming, knew the route, knew the guards would be light. But that's not the worst of it. The worst is what came after, when we realized the truth about who sent them. When we learned that the very men sworn to protect us had arranged our destruction. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rose refused to stay silent. She said the families deserved to know what happened to their sons, their fathers, their brothers. She said justice mattered more than safety. I loved her for that courage. I still do. But courage gets people killed out here, and Rose most of all. So we made the pact. All of us who survived. Those who'd worn badges and those who'd worn chains, standing together over the bodies of good men killed by greed. We buried the evidence. We buried the names of those who'd betrayed us. We swore to take the truth to our graves. But Rose wouldn't swear. She said some sins were too great to hide. She said future generations deserved to know. So they took her too, and buried her voice with the rest of it. I couldn't stop them. God help me, I was too weak to stop them. This journal is my penance. I've hidden it here, beneath the oak where we made our terrible choice. If anyone finds this, know that what we buried wasn't gold. It was proof. Proof of murder. Proof of betrayal. Proof that the men who built this territory did so on the bones of those they were sworn to protect. Look for the names in the places we marked. Look for the truth in the shadows we cast. And if you're reading this, I'm long dead and can finally rest. Tell Rose I'm sorry. Tell her I remembered. The entry ended there, but the journal continued. Page after page of names, dates, locations. A careful accounting of crimes committed and covered up. Of men in power who'd arranged ambushes on their own shipments to claim the gold themselves. Of witnesses silenced. Of bodies buried in unmarked graves across the territory. And throughout it all, one name appeared again and again, Rose Mercer, R.M., the woman in the locket, Rose. I whispered, touching her image through the fabric of my pocket. She tried to expose them. They killed her for it. Hiram's face was pale. My grandfather's name is in there. He was one of the riders, one of those who made the pact. His voice cracked. He buried the truth to save his own life. I understood his pain, understood what it meant to learn that those you'd loved were capable of moral cowardice. But I also understood something else, something Rose Mercer must have known when they silenced her. Truth didn't die just because people buried it. It waited, it festered, it demanded to be heard. There's more, I said, flipping to the back of the journal. He marked other locations, places where evidence was hidden, places where the sound of a rifle being cocked cut me off. We turned to find a rider on the ridge above us, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. I couldn't make out features, but the weapon was clear enough. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the rider spoke. You should have listened, Miss Rourke. Should have stayed buried with the rest of them. The voice was calm, conversational, familiar. Marshal Tobias Crane guided his horse down the slope toward us, rifle steady. Drop the journal. Step away from the tree. Why? I asked, forcing my voice to remain level. Because it contains proof that your ancestors were murderers, that everything your family built was stolen. Because it contains lies told by a coward who couldn't accept that sometimes hard choices must be made for the greater good. He was close now. Close enough that I could see his expression, not angry, not even cruel, just determined. My great-great-grandfather helped settle this territory, brought law and order to chaos. That journal would destroy everything he built. He killed innocent people. He protected the community. Crane dismounted, keeping the rifle trained on us. And I'll do the same. This is your last chance, Miss Rourke. Walk away. Go back to San Francisco or wherever you came from. Forget you ever found that station. I thought about Thomas bleeding in my arms. About the judges who'd walked free despite the evidence I'd gathered. About every story I'd ever buried because the cost of telling it seemed too high. Rose Mercer had refused to be silent, and they'd killed her for it. But her voice hadn't died. It had waited, buried beneath a lightning-split oak, for someone brave enough or foolish enough to hear it. I met Crane's eyes and made my choice. No. The word hung in the desert air between us. Hiram sucked in a sharp breath. Crane's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that I wouldn't be moved. I'm sorry to hear that, he said quietly. What happened next came fast. Hiram lunged at Crane, decades of guilt and shame suddenly finding release. The rifle went off, sound echoing across the empty land. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs and dust. I ran, grabbed the journal and ran for my horse, not looking back at the struggle behind me. Heard another shot, a cry of pain that might have been Hiram or might have been Crane. Mounted and kicked my horse hard, sending it racing across the desert. Behind me, Crane's voice carried on the wind. You can't outrun this, Rourke. I'll bury you with the rest of them. But I had the journal, had Rose Mercer's testimony, and Jonas Mercer's confession, and the names of every powerful man who'd built their legacy on blood and lies. I had a story, and this time I wasn't going to let anyone silence it. The station came into view as the sun touched the horizon, casting long shadows across sand that seemed to ripple like water. I didn't know if Hiram was alive or dead, didn't know how long I had before Crane came after me, didn't know if I'd survive the night, but I knew that some truths, once unearthed, refused to stay buried. Rose Mercer had tried to tell this story 150 years ago. She died for it. I wouldn't make the same mistake. I rode through the night, the journal pressed against my chest, beneath my coat like a second heartbeat. Every shadow became a threat. Every sound made me reach for the pistol I'd taken from the station's locked cabinet. Hiram didn't return. By dawn, I'd made my decision. If I ran, Crane would hunt me down. If I stayed silent, Rose Mercer's voice would be buried again, and Hiram's sacrifice would mean nothing. The only path forward was through the story itself. Find the rest of the evidence, piece together the full truth, make it impossible to silence. The journal mentioned other Mercers, descendants who might not even know their family's history. And there was one name that kept appearing in the margins: Jonas Mercer, current generation. An address at the edge of town. I found him 3 days later, after hiding at the station and gathering what courage I had left. The Mercer Ranch sat in a valley where water actually flowed year-round, prime land, the kind that spoke of wealth accumulated over generations, the kind that made you wonder what it had cost to acquire. Jonas Mercer met me on his porch. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of weathered face that came from honest work under an unforgiving sun. His eyes were intelligent, cautious, and when he saw the journal in my hands, something flickered across his expression too quickly to name: Miss Rourke. His voice was measured, careful. I heard about the trouble at the Riders' Oak. Marshal Crane said there was shooting. That old Hiram Pike was killed. The words hit like a physical blow. I'd suspected but hadn't let myself know. He died trying to protect the truth. The truth. Jonas studied me for a long moment. Come inside. We should talk away from the road. His home was surprisingly modest, given the ranch's obvious prosperity. Books lined the walls. Histories mostly, local accounts, journals from the territorial days. He saw me looking. I'm something of an amateur historian, he explained, pouring coffee with steady hands. My family's been here since the beginning. Sometimes I wonder if that's a blessing or a curse. I think you already know which. I set the journal on his table. Your ancestor wrote this, Jonas Mercer. He was part of something terrible, and he couldn't live with the silence. Jonas reached for the journal slowly, like it might burn him. His fingers traced the name on the cover. When he looked up, his eyes held something like relief. I've been waiting my whole life for someone to find this, he said quietly. Growing up, we had stories, whispers about gold and blood and pacts made in darkness. My father told me to forget them, that every old family had skeletons. But I couldn't. I kept searching. He opened the journal, scanning pages with obvious familiarity. I even found some of it. Ledgers in our cellar. Records that didn't make sense unless you understood what had really happened. Then help me. I leaned forward, desperate for an ally. Help me finish what your ancestor started. Rose Mercer tried to expose this conspiracy. They killed her for it. Hiram died for it. How many more people have to... All of them. Jonas's voice was flat. Everyone who knows dies, Miss Rourke. That's how these things work. That's how powerful families stay powerful. So we do nothing. Let them win. I didn't say that. He closed the journal carefully. I said everyone who knows dies. Which means we need to make sure everyone knows before they can kill us all. He stood, moving toward a locked cabinet. I have documents. Financial records showing how the Crane family built their fortune. Survey maps proving they took land that wasn't theirs. And I know where the original evidence is hidden. The names Jonas Mercer wrote about. Hope surged through me. Where? In my family's archives. The cellar beneath this house. He unlocked the cabinet, retrieving a key. Everything my ancestor couldn't destroy, couldn't bear to burn, he saved it all. Waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to use it, that's when I should have seen the calculation in his eyes. Should have questioned why he was so eager to help, so quick to hand over evidence that would destroy his own family's reputation. But I was tired, grieving Hiram, desperate to believe I'd found an ally. I followed Jonas Mercer down into darkness. Not knowing I was walking into a trap, the cellar smelled of earth and old paper and something else. Decay. Maybe, or just the accumulated weight of buried secrets? Jonas lit lanterns as we descended, their glow revealing walls lined with shelves, each one sagging under the burden of ledgers and documents. My great-grandfather was meticulous, Jonas said, running his hand along the spines. He documented everything. Thought it would protect him somehow, having records. Instead, it just preserved the evidence of what they'd done. I pulled down a ledger at random. The pages were filled with neat columns, dates, amounts, names. Gold shipments that arrived but were never recorded. Payments to men with badges. Coded references to problems solved and witnesses silenced. It was damning, proof of systematic corruption spanning decades. But something was wrong. I could feel it in the way Jonas watched me read, in the slight smile playing at his lips. "Where's the page about the Riders' Pact?" I asked, flipping through dates. The journal mentioned a specific date, July 14th, 1847. There should be records from... That page was removed. Jonas's voice had changed, grown colder. Removed and kept somewhere safe, along with the real proof, the document that names every conspirator. The thing my ancestor called safety buried. I turned slowly. He was blocking the stairs, and the casualness of his posture was more threatening than any weapon. "You're not going to help me, are you? Help you destroy my family's legacy? Tear down everything we've built?" He shook his head. "No, Miss Rourke. I'm going to do what my ancestors should have done with Rose Mercer. Ensure your silence permanently." My hand moved toward the pistol hidden in my coat, but Jonas was faster. His gun was already drawn, aimed at my chest with the steadiness of someone who'd done this before. "Don't." His voice was almost sad. "I actually respect you, you know. Your determination, your courage. Rose Mercer had that same fire. But fire burns, Miss Rourke, and sometimes the only way to contain it is to snuff it out. Crane sent you. Crane and I have an understanding. His family protects mine, we protect his. That's how power works in places like this, not through law or justice, but through mutually assured survival." He gestured with the gun. "Now put the journal on that shelf, carefully." I had seconds to make a decision. Give him the journal and die, or fight and probably die. Either way, Rose Mercer's story would be buried again, unless I'd already set something else in motion. "There's a copy," I said, watching his eyes. "I gave it to someone in town. If anything happens to me, they'll take it to the territorial governor." Jonas's expression flickered. Doubt, then anger. "You're bluffing, am I?" I met his gaze steadily. "I was a journalist, Mr. Mercer. I know how to protect my sources, how to ensure a story survives even if I don't." For a long moment we stood in silence. Then from above I heard voices. Footsteps on the porch. Jonas's attention shifted for just a second. I ran, threw myself past him toward the stairs, heard the gunfire, felt the bullet tear past my shoulder close enough to burn, hit the steps and scrambled upward toward fading daylight. Behind me, Jonas was shouting, but I was already through the door, already mounting my horse. I rode toward the station like death itself was chasing me. And maybe it was. The place had been ransacked. Every board pried up, every corner searched, my few belongings scattered like trash. The trapdoor where I'd found the original lockbox stood open, the space below empty. They'd taken everything, the locket, the map, the coded note, everything except what I'd hidden in my saddlebag and what I carried in my memory. I had to get word out. Had to find someone I could trust before Crane and Jonas found me. But who? Everyone in this territory seemed bought or scared or complicit. Then I remembered the girl at the telegraph office. Young, curious, asking too many questions about why I'd bought cursed ground. What was her name? Rosie. Rosie Finch. The telegraph office sat above the general store, accessed by an outside staircase that creaked with each step. I climbed at dusk, keeping to shadows, watching for Crane's men or anyone else who might be hunting me. Rosie was still at her station, transcribing messages with the focused intensity of someone who loved her work. She looked up when I entered and her eyes widened. "You look like hell, Miss Rourke. I feel worse." I locked the door behind me. "I need your help, and I need you to understand that helping me might get you killed." To her credit, Rosie didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" I pulled out Jonas Mercer's journal and the notes I'd made in the cellar. This is coded. Some kind of cipher using telegraph conventions from the 1840s. I need to decode it before people who want it buried find me. Rosie's fingers flew across the pages, her expression sharpening with concentration. This is old military code. They used it during the Mexican War. See these patterns? Dots and dashes before Morse made it standard. She grabbed a reference book from her shelf. Give me an hour. We worked by lamplight, Rosie cross-referencing symbols while I kept watch at the window. The town below was settling into evening. Lanterns flickering to life, peaceful, innocent, built on bones and buried sins. Got it. Rosie's voice was hushed with excitement. Miss Rourke, listen to this. Those who buried the name still walk. Their descendants wear the same badges, own the same land, guard the same secrets. The pack did not die with us. It lives in blood passed down, in wealth built on murder, in power that protects itself by any means necessary. The message was clear. The conspiracy hadn't ended with Rose Mercer's death. It had evolved, adapted, survived through generations. There's more, Rosie continued. A list of families. Crane, obviously, Mercer, but also Finch. Her voice cracked. That's my name. My family. I watched her face go pale as she traced her fingers over the words. Understanding was a brutal teacher. Miss Rourke, my great-great-grandfather. He was one of them. One of the riders who made the pact. Tears pooled in her eyes. All my life, we've had money we shouldn't have. Land that came from nowhere. And nobody ever questioned it because questioning meant digging up the past. I gripped her shoulder. But you're not them, Rosie. You get to choose differently. She nodded, wiping her eyes with fierce determination, then froze. Wait, there's an incoming message. The telegraph key clattered to life. Rosie transcribed rapidly, her expression darkening with each word. It's addressed to Marshall Crane, she whispered. From someone called J.M., Jonas Mercer probably. It says, the Mercer girl knows everything. Taking care of problem tonight. Make sure no witnesses remain. The Mercer girl. They were talking about Rosie. We need to leave, I said. Right now. Glass shattered as something crashed through the window. We both screamed, dropping to the floor as bullets punched through the walls above us. Outside, I heard horses, men shouting, the back stairs. Rosie gasped. There's a way out through, but when we reached the rear door, it was already open. A man stood silhouetted against the twilight, pistol raised. Sorry, ladies, he said. Orders are orders. I shoved Rosie behind me, raising my own weapon. She's innocent. Whatever you're being paid, I'll double it. Just let her, he fired. Not at me, at Rosie. I heard her cry out, felt her weight against my back. Then I was firing back, blind with rage, watching the man stumble and fall. Behind us, more footsteps on the stairs. Go, Rosie whispered, blood spreading across her shirt. They want you. Let them chase you. I'll be fine. She wasn't fine. I could see it in her eyes. But she was right. If I stayed, we'd both die here. I'll make them pay, I promised. For you, for Rose, for all of it. I ran into the desert darkness, leaving her dying on the floor of the telegraph office. Ran while men shouted and searched behind me. Ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. The next morning I found the scrap of blood-stained telegraph tape wedged into my door at the station. Rosie's handwriting, shaky but clear, trust no badge, her last message. Her last warning. She died trying to help me uncover the truth. I added her name to the list of debts I owed. Marshall Crane arrived at noon, his badge catching the sunlight like a mockery of justice. I watched him from the window, pistol loaded, too tired to run anymore. Miss Rourke, he called out. I'm here about Rosemary Finch. Terrible tragedy last night. There was a fire at the telegraph office. She didn't make it out. A fire, of course. Easier to explain than bullet wounds. I opened the door, weapon visible in my hand. Stop lying, Crane. We both know you had her killed. His expression didn't change. Careful what you accuse an officer of the law of, miss. Those are the kind of words that could get you arrested. Or worse. Worse than what you did to Rose Mercer. Worse than what you did to Hiram Pike and Rosie Finch. I stepped onto the porch. I have the journal, Crane. I have Jonas Mercer's confession. I know about the pact, about the murders, about every family that built their fortune on blood. And I'm going to tell everyone. With what proof? He smiled. The journal you claim to have. The one that's been missing for over a century. Who would believe you? A disgraced journalist running from her past, making wild accusations against respected families. He stepped closer. You're alone out here, Miss Rourke. No witnesses, no allies. No one who'll miss you when you disappear like all the others. He was right. I had copies of pages hidden, yes, but without corroboration. Without someone to support my story. She's not alone. Hiram Pike stood at the corner of the station, battered and bloodied, but very much alive. Behind him, 3 other men I didn't recognize, all armed. Hiram, I breathed. I thought, takes more than one bullet to kill a stubborn old fool, he said. And while you were running around playing investigator, I was gathering people who've been waiting for someone to finally tell this story. He gestured to the men with him. Descendants of the murdered couriers, people whose land was stolen, families who've been waiting generations for justice. Crane's hand moved toward his weapon, but Hiram was faster. Don't. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and everything you've done is about to come to light. You have nothing, Crane snarled. Rumors and old grudges. We have the well, Hiram interrupted, looking at me. The one behind this station. My grandfather told me about it before he died. Said that's where they hid the real evidence, the list of names, the death warrants they forged, everything Rose Mercer was going to expose. It's all down there, sealed in a cylinder, waiting, the well. I'd seen it, but never thought to look inside. Just assumed it had run dry like everything else out here. Crane's face went white. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. If you hurt any of us, Hiram continued, my sons in Carson City will go to the territorial governor. We've already sent them copies of what we found. But if you walk away now, let us bring this truth to light the right way. You might live to see trial instead of a rope. For a long moment, Crane stood frozen. Then he turned and mounted his horse without another word. We watched him ride away in silence. He'll come back, I said. With more men, I know. Hiram met my eyes. Which is why we need to work fast. Show me this well. The well behind the station was old, its stones crumbling, the wooden cover rotted through. We lowered a lantern on a rope, watching it descend into darkness. 30 feet down, the light reflected off something metallic. There, Hiram whispered. Just like my grandfather said. The truth they were too cowardly to destroy, but too afraid to reveal. I tied rope around my waist and let them lower me down. The well was narrow, claustrophobic, the air thick with moisture and decay. But there, wedged between stones, was a rusted cylinder sealed with wax. Inside, I knew, were the names Rose Mercer had tried to reveal. The proof Jonas Mercer had preserved. The truth that had cost so many lives. My hands closed around it, and I felt the weight of history shift. Some debts could finally be paid. They pulled me up from the well with shaking arms. The cylinder clutched against my chest like a newborn. The wax seal cracked as I pried it open, revealing parchment so old it felt like touching history itself. The first document was a death list. Names written in Rose Mercer's elegant hand, each one followed by a date and method. Samuel Cooper, shot while sleeping, made to look like robbery. Thomas Blackwell, poisoned, called natural causes. James Harrow, thrown from his horse, neck broken. 23 names in total. 23 men who'd known the truth about the gold shipments and died to keep it buried. The second document was worse. Signed confessions from the conspirators themselves, preserved like specimens in a jar. Marshal William Crane, grandfather to Tobias, admitting to arranging the ambush. Judge Matthias Finch, confessing to forging the death warrants that made the murders legal. And there, in handwriting I recognized from the journal, Jonas Mercer's ancestor. I watched them kill Rose and said nothing. I chose my life over hers. May God forgive me, for I cannot forgive myself. My God, Hiram whispered, reading over my shoulder. It's all here. Every name, every crime. This is enough to... Hoofbeats interrupted him. We all drew weapons, but the rider approaching alone had his hands raised. Jonas Mercer dismounted slowly, his face haggard. I'm not here to fight, he said. I'm here to help you finish this. Like you helped me in your cellar. I kept my pistol trained on him. Where you tried to kill me? Where I was too much of a coward to do what needed to be done, he took a step closer. Miss Rourke, I've spent my entire life trying to be better than my ancestors, trying to convince myself that their sins weren't mine to carry. But looking down that gun barrel at you, I realized something. Silence is the same as guilt. By protecting their legacy, I was becoming them. Pretty words from a man who tried to murder me. I know. His voice cracked. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But let me help you get these documents to the federal marshal in Carson City. Let me testify against Crane, against my own family if I have to. Let me do one decent thing before this all ends. I should have refused. Should have sent him away and relied only on Hiram and his allies. But I saw something in Jonas's eyes that I recognized, the desperate need for redemption, the hunger to pay a debt that had compounded across generations. If you betray us, I said quietly, I'll kill you myself. I know. He met my gaze steadily. I wouldn't expect anything less. We spent that night preparing. Hiram's men would stay and guard the station in case Crane returned with force. Jonas and I would ride to Carson City with the documents, taking back roads through the desert that only locals knew. We'd travel light, move fast, and hope that speed would keep us alive. As dawn broke bloody across the horizon, I tucked Rose Mercer's locket inside my shirt, feeling the weight of her gaze against my heart. We were finishing what she'd started 150 years ago. Either we'd succeed and her voice would finally be heard, or we'd die trying and become more names on the list of those who'd chosen truth over safety. Jonas checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. They'll come after us. You know that. I know. I mounted my horse, feeling the exhaustion in every muscle. But they've been chasing truth for a century and a half, and it's still here. Still waiting. Some things refused to stay buried. We rode out as the sun cleared the mountains, carrying the weight of 23 murders and a conspiracy that had shaped an entire territory. Behind us, the station stood silent against the desert sky, a monument to secrets that had finally run out of places to hide. The ambush came on the second day, in a canyon where the trail narrowed between red rock walls that seemed to trap the heat and hold it like a fist. I heard the shots before I saw the shooters, 3 men on the ridge above us, rifles cracking in the thin air. My horse screamed and went down. I threw myself clear, rolling behind rocks as bullets kicked up dust around me. Jonas was off his mount instantly, returning fire with deadly accuracy. "The documents!" he shouted. "Hide them!" I crawled toward a milestone marker half buried in the canyon floor, an old boundary stone from territorial days. Its base was hollow, eaten away by time and weather. I shoved the cylinder inside, covering it with dirt and rocks, marking the spot in my mind, even as bullets sang overhead. One of the shooters fell, then another. Jonas moved like a man who'd done this before, each shot precise and measured. But there were more riders coming up the canyon behind us. I could hear them, see the dust rising. "Go!" Jonas pulled me to my feet, pushing me toward his horse. "Take mine. Ride north. Don't stop until you reach Carson City. What about you?" "I'll hold them off." "Buy you time." He reloaded with steady hands. "This is my penance, Miss Rourke. Let me pay it." I wanted to argue, wanted to find another way, but the riders were closing in and we both knew there was no time. I mounted his horse, looking down at him one last time. "Jonas, tell them everything. Every name, every crime. Make sure Rose Mercer's voice is finally heard." He smiled, and it was the first time I'd seen him look at peace. "Maybe that'll balance the scales a little." I kicked the horse and rode. Behind me, gunfire erupted in earnest. I didn't look back. Couldn't afford to. The sun was setting when Marshal Crane caught up with me at a dried-out watering hole. His horse was lathered, his face twisted with rage and something else, desperation. "Where are they?" he demanded, gun already drawn. "The documents. Where did you hide them?" "Somewhere you'll never find them." I slid off my horse slowly, hands visible. "It's over, Crane. Even if you kill me, the truth is already spreading. Hiram sent copies to Carson City 3 days ago. Your family's legacy is finished." Lies, but his voice wavered. You're bluffing just like you did in Mercer's cellar. Am I? Then why are you here alone? Why didn't you bring more men? I took a step toward him. Because you're afraid. Afraid that even your own deputies won't stand with you once they know what you've been protecting. His hand shook on the gun. For a moment, I thought he might shoot me anyway. Not for the documents, but just to silence one more voice that threatened his world. But then something in him seemed to break. My great-grandfather built this territory, he said, and his voice was hollow. Brought civilization to chaos. Does it matter how? Does it matter what it cost? Yes. I thought of Rose Mercer, of Rosie Finch, of Thomas bleeding in my arms back in San Francisco. It matters. It always matters. Marshal Crane looked at me for a long moment. Then he raised his gun, not at me, but at his own temple. No. I lunged forward, but the shot echoed across the empty desert before I could reach him. He fell like a puppet with cut strings, blood dark against the sand. In death he looked smaller somehow. Less like the monster I'd imagined and more like what he really was. A man crushed beneath the weight of inherited sins, choosing to end his story rather than face its final chapter. I stood over his body as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Thought about Jonas, probably dead in that canyon. About Hiram's testimony waiting in Carson City. About all the voices that had been silenced to protect a lie. Marshal Crane's death wouldn't bring them back, wouldn't undo the suffering or erase the injustice. But it meant the conspiracy could no longer hide behind a badge. I remounted and rode through the night toward Carson City, carrying the weight of every name on Rose Mercer's list. Behind me, the desert wind covered Crane's body with sand, already beginning the work of burial. Some truths, once unearthed, changed everything. Even when the cost was measured in corpses. The federal marshal's name was Catherine Webb, and she listened to my story with the kind of attention that comes from actually caring about justice. I showed her the documents I'd retrieved from the milestone marker, returned on horseback with a military escort after Crane's body was found. I showed her Hiram's testimony, delivered before he died peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later, his conscience finally clear. She investigated. She questioned. She dug through archives and interviewed descendants and followed every thread of the conspiracy until it unraveled completely. 6 weeks after I rode into Carson City looking like death warmed over, the territorial governor himself held a press conference. The story broke across newspapers nationwide, century-old conspiracy exposed. And territorial founding families built on murder, the buried names finally brought to light. Rose Mercer's photograph appeared in papers from San Francisco to New York. The young woman with challenging eyes, finally getting her moment of vindication. Jonas Mercer's confession was read aloud in courtrooms. His final act of redemption, acknowledged even as his family's fortune was seized and distributed to descendants of the murdered couriers. They found Rosie Finch's body in the ruins of the telegraph office, buried her with full honors, her tombstone reading, "She died seeking truth." The Finch family fortune was similarly confiscated. The land returned to its rightful owners. Jonas Mercer's death was confirmed. He died in that canyon holding off Crane's men, buying me the time I needed to escape. They buried him in the family plot despite everything. His grave marker simple, Jonas Alexander Mercer. He chose differently. I stayed in Carson City through the trials, through the testimonies, through the slow grinding of justice that never moves fast enough but sometimes, occasionally, moves in the right direction. And when it was finally done, when every name had been read aloud and every crime acknowledged, I'd returned to the Stagecoach station I'd bought for 70 cents and a desperate need for peace. It looked different now. Hiram's sons had repaired the roof, replaced the broken windows, strengthened the foundation. But I kept the carved initials in the doorframes, kept the wanted posters on the walls, kept the trapdoor visible beneath a sheet of glass so visitors could see where it all began. Because that's what the station had become, a memorial. Each room dedicated to a different victim of the conspiracy. Rose Mercer's room held her locket and her death list, her photograph watching over everything with those challenging eyes. Rosie Finch's room displayed her last telegraph message, the blood-stained tape preserved behind glass. Jonas Mercer's room held his ancestors' journal, his confession, and the story of his redemption. People came from all over the territory to see it. Descendants of victims seeking closure, historians documenting the truth, even some from the guilty families wanting to understand what their ancestors had done. I gave tours myself, telling the story in my own words, making sure every voice was heard. It wasn't journalism exactly. I'd lost my taste for that after Thomas died. But it was something. A way of honoring the dead by ensuring they weren't forgotten. On the anniversary of that first night in the station, I sat on the porch watching the sun set over the desert. I'd started keeping a journal, writing down everything that had happened, every choice and consequence and cost. My final entry for that day read, "I came to Nevada to escape guilt, to bury myself in silence and solitude, to punish myself for the story that got Thomas killed." Instead, I found Rose Mercer's voice waiting beneath the floor, and Hiram Pike's courage hidden behind superstition, and even Jonas Mercer's redemption buried under generations of shame. 70 cents bought me a broken station and a debt 2 centuries deep. But some debts are worth paying. Some stories need to be told no matter the cost. And some voices, once silenced, refuse to stay quiet. They just wait for someone brave enough or foolish enough to hear them. I'm not the journalist I was in San Francisco. That woman died in an alley with Thomas, believing truth came with too high a price. But I'm something else now, a keeper of voices, a guardian of buried names, a woman who learned that redemption isn't found in silence, but in refusing to let the dead be forgotten. Rose Mercer died seeking justice. Rosie Finch died helping me find it. Hiram Pike died with his conscience clear. Jonas Mercer died choosing honor over legacy. And Marshall Crane died knowing his family's sins would finally see daylight. Their deaths weren't meaningless. They were the cost of truth in a world that prefers comfortable lies. And if their sacrifices taught me anything, it's this. Some stories refuse to stay buried. Some truths endure no matter how deep you dig the grave. Some voices echo across centuries, waiting for someone to finally listen. I listened. And in listening, I found not peace exactly, but something better, purpose. The understanding that my guilt over Thomas doesn't require silence. It requires honoring his memory by continuing the work we started together. By telling stories that matter. By giving voice to those who've been silenced. The desert wind never stops blowing across this station. It carries whispers of the past, echoes of violence and betrayal and courage. But now it also carries something else. Vindication, justice. The knowledge that Rose Mercer's truth finally broke free of the darkness that held it. They say every old building has stories buried in its walls. I bought a Stagecoach station for 70 cents and found a century and a half of silenced voices. I gave them back their words. I told their stories. And in doing so, I finally paid the debt I owed Thomas. Some debts take lifetimes to settle. Some take centuries. But in the end, truth has a way of surfacing, of refusing to stay buried, of demanding to be heard. I'll stay here, in this station at the edge of the Nevada desert, telling these stories for as long as breath remains in my body. Because Rose Mercer deserves to be remembered. Because Rosie Finch's courage shouldn't be forgotten. Because every name on that death list was a person who mattered, whose loss should be acknowledged. 70 cents bought me a death sentence, though I didn't know it at the time. It also bought me redemption. It bought me purpose. It bought me the chance to do what I couldn't do for Thomas, to ensure that truth, no matter how long buried, eventually finds its way to light. The Rider's Oak still stands on the eastern ridge, its lightning-split trunk a reminder that some things survive even when torn apart. The well behind the station remains, its waters running clear now, no longer hiding secrets in its depths. And the lockbox that started it all sits in Rose Mercer's room, empty now of everything except the knowledge that its discovery changed history. Every evening, I walk the property as the sun sets, touching the carved initials in the doorframes, imagining the lives that passed through here on their way to somewhere else. Most are forgotten now, lost to time's erosion. But a few, the ones who chose truth over safety, courage over comfort, justice over inherited privilege, their names remain. Their stories endure, and I'm here to make sure they always will. I closed the journal and watched the last light fade from the sky. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the sound carrying across empty miles. The station settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, a structure that had survived abandonment and conspiracy, and the weight of buried sins. It would survive longer still. A monument to voices that refuse to be silenced. A testament to the cost of truth and the price of justice. 70 cents bought me a broken station and a debt 2 centuries deep. But some debts are worth paying, and some stories, once told, can never be buried again. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.